It was supposed to be just another ordinary Sunday in Pine Grove, the kind of day when the biggest drama was someone parking their car 2 centimeters off the white line. Nathan had grown accustomed to the predictable routine of the suburb, mowing the lawn, listening to the HOA's complaints about the mailbox color, pretending to be interested in the association meetings, and ending the afternoon with Liv, his wife, having coffee on the porch. They had been living there for 7 years. The house was modest, yet well-maintained, and life seemed stable. Liv, calm and methodical, worked as a remote data analyst, or at least that's what she claimed. Nothing in her serene expression hinted that Nathan's world was about to be turned upside down in a matter of minutes. It all began with a sharp knock at the door, too forceful to be a neighbor asking for sugar. 3 men in uniforms bearing the HOA logo, the same one that sent out letters about fences being out of line, showed up, saying they needed to speak with Liv about a serious non-compliance. Their tone was not bureaucratic, it was threatening. Nathan didn't understand at first, but he saw it when Liv looked at him as if she wanted to apologize for something. In seconds, she was taken away without resistance, as if she already knew this was going to happen. One of the men handed over a paper with confusing language and left. No neighbor appeared. No camera recorded the event. It seemed like a clean, well-planned operation, and it was in that silence that everything began to fall apart. Nathan stood still for a few seconds, staring at the closed door, the paper trembling in his hand. It was as if the world had spun around without warning. He reread the document. Filled with bureaucratic terms, it spoke of voluntary detention for the investigation of community safety irregularities. Nothing made sense. He tried calling Liv, but her phone was off. He tried the HOA's number, but it only gave a busy signal. He went out to the sidewalk, looking around as if someone could explain what had just happened. Nothing. The silence of the street was almost insulting. And then he remembered the strangest thing. Liv didn't seem scared. She seemed prepared. The first clue appeared in the basement closet. Nathan only went there because he noticed that the key from the bottom of Liv's drawer was out of place. She had always been obsessive about that. Behind the Christmas boxes, he found a false wall. It was there, among bags of cement and old tools, that the ordinary house concealed something out of the norm, a sort of mini control room. It had screens, maps of the neighborhood, devices he couldn't even name. And in the center of it all, a folder with handwritten instructions. The first page read, "If you are reading this, it is because they took me. Do not call the police. Trust Chris at House 14B. He will know what to do." That was when Nathan understood. His partner in life was not who she claimed to be. Chris from House 14B was the type of neighbor whose occupation no one really knew. He was always home, taking care of the garden with almost military efficiency, and had a Labrador named Suki, who wore a red bandana around her neck. Nathan went over there with the folder tucked under his arm, not knowing what to expect. When Chris opened the door, he looked straight at the folder and silently shook his head. He called Nathan inside, locked 3 different deadbolts, and pulled a heavy curtain across the living room window. Without any preamble, he said, "So she was taken. We knew this could happen." That hit like a punch. Chris not only knew who Liv really was, he was also part of it all. In Chris's basement, the suburban facade disappeared. It was another operations center, smaller but equally impressive. There were red-circled photos of Karen, the HOA president, lists of names, and bank account numbers in tax havens. Chris explained everything straightforwardly, as if it were routine. Liv was a CIA agent, infiltrated 3 years ago to investigate the HOA, which operated as a front for an international money laundering scheme. Karen was the key piece, controlling everything under the guise of community zeal. The abduction had not been authorized by the CIA. It was an action by the HOA's private security group, created precisely to eliminate anyone who threatened the system. And now, with Liv off the field, someone would have to act fast. Nathan had never imagined that his life would ever cross paths with anything involving spies, surveillance, or secret operations. He was just an ordinary guy, a bookkeeper, discreet, the kind who knew the cooking channel schedule by heart. But at that moment, facing monitors, aerial photos of his own neighborhood, and classified documents, he realized there was no time to hesitate. Chris explained that Liv had left instructions on what to do if she were captured. There was a data backup hidden in their garden greenhouse, and that backup was the key to accessing the HOA server and understanding just how far the scheme reached. Nathan wasn't an agent, but his motivation was stronger than his fear. He needed to find Liv, and if that meant stepping outside the bounds of the ordinary, he would do it. Returning home felt strange. Every room now seemed to carry a new layer filled with questions. He crossed the garden at a brisk pace, dodging the flower pots as if he were traversing enemy territory. In the greenhouse, beneath the tray of basil seedlings, he discovered a false compartment holding a USB drive sealed with black tape. This simple object seemed to bear the weight of something far greater than he could comprehend. Nathan rushed back to the basement, where Chris connected the device to a secure computer. Within seconds, maps of the neighborhood appeared with colored markings, surveillance points, houses with hidden microphones, even escape routes. But what caught his attention was a tab labeled Operation Magnolia. It was the name of Liv's mission and indicated that she was scheduled to be transferred to a control point at 4 p.m., meaning time was running out. Nathan looked at Chris with his heart pounding. They had just over 2 hours. Everything now depended on them. Chris called for backup, not out loud or by phone, but by sending a message with 3 specific emojis in a gardening group that apparently was a secret CIA network in the suburbs. In less than 15 minutes, 3 neighbors arrived. Mrs. Darlene from House 11A, who looked like a grandmother addicted to knitting but was actually an expert in cryptography, and the couple Ali and Marco, owners of the taco food truck on the back street, who served as logistics and field support. Nathan watched all of this with a mix of shock and admiration. That neighborhood, which he had always considered boring and overly proper, hid an entire network of agents living under the guise of everyday life. But that day, no one was on a routine mission. They were all focused on one thing: bringing Liv back and dismantling the corrupt structure of the HOA. The first step was to disable the HOA's surveillance system, which used drones and hidden cameras on streetlights and mailboxes. Darlene accessed a secret panel on the corner and with a small device attached to the power cable, managed to disrupt the signal. The video feeds went dark, an early victory. Meanwhile, Chris and Nathan studied the map Liv had left. The control point was one of the abandoned model homes at the end of the subdivision, the ones never sold because of structural defects. The plan was simple yet risky. Infiltrate the location before the transfer took place, extract Liv, and capture evidence that could expose Karen and the other conspirators. Nathan felt the gravity of the decisions, yet a newfound courage surged through him. Adrenaline replaced fear, and for the first time that day, he felt part of something greater than the chaos around him. He was no longer just a desperate husband. He was now part of the operation. The makeshift team set off using little-used routes, through the backyards of houses, over fences unlocked from the inside, and along hidden passages between gardens. Nathan never imagined that the paths once used by children riding bicycles in the late afternoons could be so vital for a mission of this magnitude. The air grew heavier as they approached the isolated sector of the neighborhood where the model homes stood. There was an eerie silence there, as if the very place was aware of its secrets. The group stopped about 50 meters from the target house, concealed behind a fallen tree. Using binoculars, Ali identified 2 armed guards outside and a white van bearing the HOA logo parked nearby. That was it. Nathan's stomach churned at the thought that Liv might be inside, perhaps tied up or injured, and the idea tightened his chest like a noose. Chris outlined the plan: create a distraction on the side of the house, infiltrate through the basement, and execute a swift extraction. Nathan was to enter with Chris. Not ideal, but Liv had trusted him, and that counted. The taco food truck couple activated a small sound device that mimicked the smoke alarm of a neighboring house. The guards turned, alert. In seconds, Chris and Nathan sprinted across the lawn and broke through the basement window. The interior of the house smelled of old paint and mold. The walls were covered with sheets of paper, filled with notes, as if someone had been piecing together an investigative board. Yet it was evident they were trying to erase evidence. Silently, they climbed the stairs. On the second floor, they found a locked door. Nathan didn't hesitate. He kicked it hard. On the other side was Liv, her arms bound to a chair. When she heard the commotion, she turned her head and smiled, with eyes that were tired yet very much alive. She was alive, and now they had a real chance to get out of there. Chris cut Liv's restraints with precision, while Nathan held the door. The activity outside indicated that the guards had noticed the distraction. It wouldn't be long before someone came up. Even though Liv was weakened, she was lucid. She explained that they had removed her phone and microphone, but there was still a listening device hidden in the heel of her shoe. She only needed 10 seconds to activate it and send a signal to the CIA base. Nathan crouched down and helped release the mechanism. A soft click was all they heard. In less than 2 minutes, Liv confirmed that help was on its way. It was now a matter of holding on until then. They heard footsteps on the stairs. Chris handed a small gun to Liv and another to Nathan. "Only if absolutely necessary," he warned. It seemed surreal, a local bookkeeper, gun in hand, protecting his spy wife. The first 2 men appeared in the hallway, armed. Chris acted quickly. He tossed a flashbang onto the floor, and the silent explosion temporarily blinded the attackers. Nathan pulled Liv along, and the three of them ran to the bathroom at the end of the corridor, where there was a skylight. It was cramped, but it was the only exit. Liv climbed up first, followed by Chris. Nathan was the last, and he barely set foot on the roof when he heard gunshots from inside the house. The sound echoed through the empty streets, shattering Pine Grove's artificial calm. Up on the hot, stifling tiles, they crawled to the side, where a rope was already waiting for them. Darlene had set up an improvised extraction point with Marco's help. As soon as the three touched the ground, the HOA van exploded. Not by chance, but due to a device planted minutes earlier by Ali, ensuring that no evidence would be relocated. It was the end of the kidnapping, but not the end of the war. The rescue was only the beginning. On the way home, Liv explained what she had been discovering over the past few months. The HOA was not just a local network of bureaucratic abuses. It was part of a larger structure, laundering money through fictitious maintenance contracts, ghost property rentals, and the misappropriation of public improvement funds. Karen was more than the association's president. She was a key piece in an international network with branches in 3 states. Liv had tracked meetings, intercepted payments, and gathered testimonies from coerced ex-employees. But now, with the van's explosion and the thwarted kidnapping, everything was about to spiral out of control. The CIA knew they had to act fast, but Liv had another idea: expose Karen in front of the entire community, turning the moment into something public and undeniable. It was risky, but it carried a greater impact. And it had to happen that very day. Chris supported the idea. The quarterly HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the community hall, the tacky space with stained carpet and trays of cold cookies. It was the perfect venue. The team mobilized. Nathan prepared the files from Liv's USB drive. Darlene hacked into the hall's sound system. Ali and Marco positioned microcameras and hid equipment in empty juice boxes. At 6:50 p.m., the residents began arriving with their usual complaints and grievances. The neighbor who planted bamboo without authorization, the dog barking after 10 at night, the off-standard lawn of House 22D. And in the midst of it all, Karen appeared, with that arrogant air of someone who believed she controlled everything. Nathan watched her enter, as if it were the last time she would parade around with that attitude. Little did she know, the trap was already set. The meeting began, like all the others. Karen opened the agenda with her forced smile, thanking the residents for their presence and listing the new community regulations. Absurd rules, such as the ban on visible clotheslines and the requirement to maintain at least 2 species of flowers in the front gardens, were met with silent nods. It was always like that. People complained at home, but in front of her, they kept quiet. The fear of fines, veiled threats, and retaliation spoke louder than any word. That was when Nathan, wearing a plain shirt and holding a brown envelope, raised his hand. Karen hesitated, surprised. He never spoke up at meetings. "I would like to share something with the neighbors," he said. Karen tried to stop him, insisting that only council members could speak. But at that moment, the stage microphone emitted a hiss, and Darlene's voice filled the room. "All of us deserve to know the truth about who is making decisions on our behalf." With that statement, the improvised screen behind the stage lit up. Images began to appear. Documents with signatures on fraudulent contracts, bank statements showing international transfers, photos of clandestine meetings between Karen and suited men in empty parking lots. The expressions on the neighbors' faces gradually changed, from apathy to confusion, from confusion to indignation. Karen stood up, attempting to turn off the projector, but was restrained by Chris, who positioned himself firmly yet without violence. "Everything is being recorded," he said. "Any further move will only worsen your situation." Karen tried to explain, to claim that it was all a misunderstanding, but no one was listening anymore. The hall, for the first time in a long time, was awake, and there, in front of everyone, the mask fell. The woman who even dictated what type of curtain was allowed on the windows was, in reality, the center of an international scheme. The impact was immediate. People who had previously avoided confrontation began to stand up, some yelling, others demanding explanations. Mr. Howard, the retiree from House 9A, who had already been fined 3 times for leaving his trash out on Sundays, rose with misty eyes and pointed a finger at Karen, saying, "You made me sell my boat because of a threatening letter." Within minutes, the hall turned into a mix of a town meeting and a collective outburst. Every resident seemed to carry some long-held grievance, and now they had a clear target. Nathan watched with his heart racing, but he also felt a sense of justice forming, as if that day, chaotic as it was righting years of abuse disguised as organization. Even while still recovering from the kidnapping, Liv took the microphone. She revealed who she was, why she was there, and how the entire operation had been set up to protect not only the community's integrity, but also the lives involved. She spoke firmly without arrogance, explaining that her work had never been about interference, but about observation, that the residents had always had power, they just didn't know it. Her words silenced the hall. For the first time, everyone saw Liv not just as Nathan's quiet and well-mannered wife, but as an agent. More than that, she was someone who had risked everything to protect neighbors who barely knew her. Karen, now seated with 2 CIA agents stationed by her side, looked like a shadow of her former self. The authoritarian leader had become the defendant, and with her removal, the HOA lost its central figure. Yet the system was still there, and the question hung in the air: who would take her place? The meeting ended with applause and promises, but no one left feeling relieved. It was as if everyone had emerged from a trance, looking at each other with a mix of shame and relief. What Karen had built took years, and undoing it would take time, but the first step had been taken. That very night, a group of residents gathered informally at Mr. Howard's house to discuss their next steps. Liv was present, but made it clear that she couldn't lead anything officially. "Now it's up to you," she said, clutching a cup of tea with trembling hands. It was then that Nathan realized that despite all the action, true change would only come if the community took control, not with weapons or secret operations, but with presence, voting, and the courage to speak up. The next day, posters began appearing on the posts around Pine Grove. Extraordinary General Assembly, open elections for a new HOA presidency. No one knew exactly who had organized it, but everyone knew it was time for a change. Even the most skeptical showed up. The meeting was held outdoors, on the children's soccer field. Nathan, his voice still choked by the previous day's events, was nominated by acclamation. He tried to decline, but Liv looked at him with that half smile she used when she wanted him to trust her. He accepted, and there, before neighbors tired of being treated like numbers or infractions, he assumed the presidency of the association with a simple promise. No more decisions behind closed doors. We're going to do this right. That did not erase what they had lived through, but it offered a new beginning. A beginning where rules were not weapons, where the HOA would become what it was meant to be from the start, a tool for the community, not against it. For several weeks, Pine Grove felt like a different place. Meetings were now held at accessible times, with open voting and records available for everyone. Families that had previously avoided contact began to converse in their backyards. Children could play on the sidewalks without fear of being reported for misuse of common areas. For the first time in a long time, the neighborhood truly felt alive. Even as president, Nathan made a point not to assume an authoritarian stance. He delegated decisions, encouraged suggestions, and began walking the streets just to listen to what people wanted to change. Liv, gradually returning to her routine, still receiving periodic visits from the agency, but more present, lighter, resumed their morning coffee on the porch, but now with a different awareness. Peace came at a price, and they knew it, and they were willing to pay it. But the calm was short-lived. On an ordinary afternoon, while Nathan was cleaning the pool filter, a moving truck pulled up in front of House 8C, one of the few that had remained unoccupied since the scandal. Out of it stepped a man in a grey suit, his appearance impeccable, wearing dark sunglasses and a smile that seemed more rehearsed than genuine. "I'm Ted. New neighbor," he said, extending his hand. Nathan shook it warily. There was something in his tone that didn't add up. An overly polite demeanor, the way he surveyed the neighborhood as if evaluating a battlefield. Later, while reviewing the transfer paperwork, Nathan discovered that Ted had purchased the house through a shell company, the same pattern used in the properties the former HOA employed to camouflage financial transactions. When Liv learned of this, she fell silent for a few seconds before saying, "He didn't come by accident. This isn't over yet." And she was right. Ted wasn't just a new neighbor, he was the next chapter. In the following days, Ted began to maneuver in a subtle but effective manner. He appeared at community meetings with polite yet strangely familiar suggestions. He proposed visual standardization protocols for the facades, claiming that this would increase the neighborhood's value. He talked about administrative efficiency and the importance of a technocratic leadership. Many residents, tired of the previous mess, saw in him an organized, trustworthy figure. But Nathan and Liv could recognize the scent of manipulation. It was the same rhetoric that Karen used, only packaged in a more modern and less authoritarian way. Ted approached with charm, yet his eyes never smiled. He never misspoke a technical term, knew too many details about the internal structure of the HOA, and never revealed much about his own life. He claimed to work in asset consulting, which basically said nothing at all. Liv began to investigate discreetly. She installed a micro camera at one of the informal meetings that Ted organized with some neighbors, gatherings that took place in the basement of his house, always off the official schedule. In the video, Ted spoke naturally about restoring order and seizing the moment of transition to restructure decision-making power. He presented spreadsheets, ready-made contracts, and maps with markings that indicated areas with potential for control. It was clear he was trying to set up a new version of the HOA with the same objectives as the previous one, but using the language of efficiency and progress. What was frightening was the receptivity. Some neighbors, especially those who feared chaos and preferred clear rules, were listening. Ted didn't need to impose himself. He was seducing. He used the insecurity left by the previous collapse to build something new, something harder to identify as a threat. And Liv knew that if they didn't act soon, he would take control through legitimate channels. Nathan, Liv, and their closest allies knew they couldn't repeat the previous formula. Exposing Ted with documents or formal accusations would only give him the chance to play the victim, and perhaps even strengthen his necessary rupture rhetoric. They needed another kind of action, something unexpected, symbolic, creative. That's when Lee had the idea that became an inside joke and then a real plan. Let's use the flamingos. Pine Grove, like many suburban neighborhoods, prohibited by regulation the placement of pink flamingos in gardens. Karen used to say they devalued the community's aesthetic standard. They decided to turn the tables. On a Saturday morning, more than 40 houses woke up with flamingos lined up on their lawns. Not only as a visual provocation, but because each one concealed a small built-in speaker that in unison played excerpts from the recordings made at Ted's clandestine meetings. The neighborhood awoke to a chorus of phrases such as "silent control is more efficient than force," and "no one questions when the process appears democratic." The effect was immediate. People came out onto the sidewalks, laughing, frightened, recording videos, and sharing them on social media. The internet did not forgive. In a matter of hours, the neighborhood became news, memes emerged, and hashtags began circulating. The attention Ted had wanted with his image as an efficient manager turned against him like a boomerang. He tried to deny it, tried to deflect, but the very recordings, captured in such a creative manner, brought him down. The CIA was monitoring everything, ready to intervene if necessary, but it was the community itself that reacted first. Nathan called an emergency meeting to review the HOA rules and, to everyone's surprise, proposed the permanent dissolution of the president's position. We no longer need a figure of power. We need tools for real participation. He was met with a standing ovation. Even those who had previously doubted recognized that something had changed for good. The dissolution of the HOA president's role marked a definitive turning point. Instead of a central leadership, Nathan suggested a rotating model of open commissions where decisions would be made in cycles by residents with proportional representation and periodic reviews. Nothing would be imposed. Everything had to be discussed and approved collectively. It was bureaucratic, yes. It required work, of course. But it also restored to the people the sense of belonging that had long been suppressed. The street of House 22D, once known for anonymous notes about improper noise, became a meeting point for community barbecues. Children started organizing bicycle races with handmade posters. Even the elderly Mrs. Middleton, who never smiled, showed up with a cake at the last assembly. Liv observed everything from afar, without interfering, but with a sparkle in her eyes that Nathan hadn't seen since before the mission began. Ted, for his part, vanished from the map on a silent night, taking his boxes, his suits, and his air of efficiency. House 8C remained empty for a few weeks until it was occupied by a visual artist and her noisy dog, and no one complained. The community, now more confident in itself, had developed a kind of collective radar to recognize false leaders. What impressed Nathan was not only the resistance to the return of oppression, but the ease with which people were learning to say no. That distrust, which had previously been directed at neighbors, was now channeled towards systems, structures, and intentions. People began to question not only what was forbidden, but why. What seemed like a simple rebellion against garden rules had turned into a profound process of social reconstruction. A neighborhood that had once been silenced had found its own voice, and perhaps, Nathan thought, that was what Liv had been trying to teach all along. Time passed, and the routine of Pine Grove finally found its balance. Without the weight of authoritarian leadership, people began to take on small responsibilities with greater autonomy. One group took care of the playground, another organized Sunday fairs. Decisions took time, generated discussion, but no one would ever again accept being ordered around without understanding the reasons why. Nathan, now out of any formal position, maintained an active presence, more as a listener than as a central figure. He had returned to work as usual, but with a new mindset, less about controlling, more about understanding. Sometimes he would sit on the porch, watching the comings and goings of neighbors, reflecting on how much everything had changed. The street looked the same, but the people, no. And he, especially, was no longer the man who spent his Sundays mowing the lawn and pretending to understand the world around him. One evening, after a simple dinner with Liv, he found a plain white envelope with no return address in the mailbox. It wasn't uncommon. Since Karen's days, HOA correspondence was often anonymous, but this one was different. Inside, there was only a sheet of paper with a handwritten phrase, "Where there is organization, there will always be someone trying to control it." The handwriting was neat, almost elegant, yet with an unsettling tone. Liv read it and said nothing. She just looked at her husband and nodded slowly, as if recognizing an invisible signature. They didn't know who had sent it, nor the exact motive. It could have been a warning. It could have been a provocation. But in a way, it was also a truth. No matter how much they had won that battle, the balance was fragile. There was no guarantee of lasting peace, only the commitment to remain vigilant, present, and together. Nathan kept the note in a drawer. Not out of fear, but to remind himself that freedom, even in a quiet neighborhood, demands constant vigilance. Days after the note, a new movement caught the neighborhood's attention. An unknown man was seen walking along the bike path with a clipboard in hand, noting details about the houses, the gardens, the sidewalks. He was discreet, spoke to no one, but his behavior aroused curiosity. Nathan watched him from the porch without reacting. He had learned from Liv that the most important signals are rarely loud. Later, when reviewing footage from the security cameras installed after the Karen scandal, Chris confirmed the same man had been seen twice before in Pine Grove in previous months, always on Tuesdays, always alone. Liv analyzed the images and came to an unsettling conclusion. The man was part of a territorial consulting network that, according to internal CIA records, was trying to map communities in order to replicate the model of silent control tested by the former HOA. It was a new threat, not a direct one, not an aggressive one, but patient, strategic, invisible. But unlike in the past, Pine Grove did not react with fear. When the man returned the following week, he found the neighborhood full of handmade signs bearing phrases such as, "Here we decide together," "Community cannot be bought," and "The rules have changed." And once again, the flamingos were there, this time wearing sunglasses and bandanas around their necks, as if mocking the silent surveillance. People laughed, united, took photos. The visitor stayed no longer than 10 minutes before leaving without looking back. That small scene, without any physical confrontation, without fiery speeches, summed up everything the neighborhood had become. The strength no longer came from charismatic leaders or secret plans. It came from the collective awareness that the place belonged to everyone, and that no one, however elegant or strategic, would have more power than a shared will. Nathan saw it all from the porch and for the first time in months rested his head on Liv's shoulder with a calm smile. They had won. Again. But more importantly, they had learned not to forget. That very night, as the street quieted and distant laughter drifted from some spontaneous gathering in the garden of House 17B, Nathan went down to the basement. Liv's secret room was still there, almost intact. Some screens had been turned off, the equipment neatly organized in boxes. But the maps were still on the walls. One of them, marked with colorful pins, showed Pine Grove in details that even the residents did not know. It was strange to think that that structure had been built in silence, under the same roof where they shared pizzas and watched movies. He walked through the space calmly, touching the objects, recalling every moment of the past few months. The kidnapping, the discovery, the fear, the reaction, the victory. It was hard to believe that all of that had happened in a single day, because even with the developments that followed, that Sunday had changed the course of everything, a silent yet profound turning point. Liv appeared in the doorway and watched him in silence for a few seconds before approaching. She too looked around as if revisiting an old battlefield. "Are you going to dismantle this?" she asked. Nathan hesitated. Part of him wanted to keep everything, as if it were a trophy of resistance. But the other part, the one that had learned to live in the present with more lightness, knew it was time to let go. "I think so," he replied. "We won. But now there's something else to build." And there, in that basement where a neighborhood had been saved without anyone knowing, the two began packing up the past. Not as if they were running from it, but as if they knew that even a good story comes to an end. There was no perfect ending. There was no manual. There was only learning, and for them that was more than enough. A few weeks later, during an informal assembly organized in the field where HOA parties used to be held, someone asked Nathan if he would lead the neighborhood again if necessary. He smiled, took a deep breath, and replied simply, "I hope it won't be necessary." He didn't say it out of fatigue or disregard. He said it because he now understood the burden of a place that depends on a single person. What happened in Pine Grove was not a hero's story. It was a story of collective maturity, ordinary people learning to act, to talk, to disagree with respect. Liv, seated on a nearby bench, watched everything with a calm gaze. She knew, perhaps better than anyone there, how rare it was to see a community regain control without bloodshed, without losing hope. And she knew that part of that miracle lay in the way Nathan had decided to act. Not craving power, but not shirking responsibility either. The neighborhood was never the same again, and thank goodness. The anonymous letters disappeared. The absurd regulations turned into jokes. The assemblies now ended with coffee, cake, and children running free. The flamingos, once forbidden, became a symbol of resistance. And even today, somewhere out there, a newcomer appears with a note pinned to their neck as a reminder that freedom must be maintained with lightness and creativity. As for Nathan and Liv, they continued living in the same house as always. Sometimes, when they saw a strange car passing slowly, they exchanged silent glances, but not with fear, with attention. Their story never made headlines, nor a book, nor a movie. But there, among living fences and renovated gardens, they had done the unthinkable. They had overcome control with dialogue, fear with unity, silence with courage. And that, even if no one else knew, would change Pine Grove forever.